There is a country in North America that is currently being subjected to what can only be described as unimaginably harsh sanctions that have been imposed by the United States. States for a length of time longer than 60 years, states for an extended period of time. This country is known by its Spanish name, Cuba. At the present time, Cuba and China have signed a brand new agreement to work together on a strategic level. The United States of America, along with the rest of the globe, quickly became extremely concerned about the issue after it captured the attention of the global community. That makes me really angry. What exactly are you attempting to convey with these words? I will explain the reasoning behind the economic blockade that the United States has imposed on Cuba in this video. The embargo was imposed by the United States to such an extent. How exactly would the United States be impacted by Cuba's strategic partnership with China? Cuba is a tremendously powerful country in its own right and stands on its own 2 feet.
217 kilometers to the north of this place is where you will find Cape Sable, which is the farthest southern point of the Florida Peninsula in the United States.
If the United States does not impose any sanctions on Cuba, then relations between the two countries will remain unchanged and continue to operate as usual. Should be within a very close proximity to one another. In addition to this, Cuba possesses a very wide diversity of resources in a wide variety of forms. On the other side, the United States is said to have implemented sanctions, at least according to the information that is now accessible. Cuba has been attempting to harvest the country's treasures for as long as 60 years, but they have never been successful in doing so. As a result, there is no way that Cuba's economy could ever show signs of improvement. The question therefore becomes, why did the United States choose to impose an embargo on Cuba? From what may be gained from many decades of history, the following is the United States' purpose for attempting to isolate Cuba. The goal of which is to put pressure on the government of Cuba. It's possible that you're aware that in 1962, Cuba went through a missile crisis that caused shockwave to be felt all across the world because there was a real risk that the crisis might result in the start of a nuclear war. The United States used this pretext to justify their actions. Complete isolation should be imposed on Cuba. The United States will continue to be in a position to exert influence over Cuba so long as the island is cut off from the rest of the globe. The country of Cuba's current economic status, and once a nation reaches the point where it has no economic development, it is certain to fail at some point in the not-too-distant future, and that failure is certain to be sooner rather than later. What countermeasures does Cuba intend to take in response to the economic blockade that the United States has imposed? In light of the current crisis, it is quite evident that Cuba will not adopt a blase attitude toward the situation. There are now more countries cooperating with one another than ever before, despite the fact that the United States has the second largest economy in the world. Working together with China on the Belt and Road Initiative, as of right now, a total of 143 countries and more than 30 international organizations based in the area have the One Belt, One Road initiative proposed by China has been endorsed by the vast majority of nations across the globe in the hope of gaining mutually beneficial relationships with China. In the same vein, Cuba anticipates that it will be able to climb out of its current economic predicament by working closely with China's government One Belt, One Road, the Belt and Road plan may include Cuba as early as October 2021, if China continues to show support for the country's membership in the program. Partnership as well as the formation of a strategic alliance with China are being pursued here. In light of this, what are the benefits that come about as a result of China and Cuba cooperating with one another? China is the most economically strong nation on the planet and also has the largest economy in the world, according to the perspective of Cuba, largest industrial scale. Cuba will be able to pull out of the economic and trade bind that it is in with this amount, which is just the correct number. China is the only country that invests in and provides assistance to Cuba, which is why Cuba is in a position to entirely lift the blockade. Addition to the sanctions that the United States has already imposed, and Cuba is fully aware that the strength that China currently possesses can completely sway them in the opposite direction. Nevertheless, what potential benefits does China stand to obtain from this joint effort? In order to demonstrate its connection to China during the past 60 years, Cuba has used its own country to further China's interest. Republic of the United States of America, this determined approach and attitude can not only assuage the concerns that China has, but it can also shed light on the current predicament where the armed battle between the two countries is now taking place. Now, as a result of their collaborative efforts, China and Cuba will be able to achieve a result that is to the advantage of both of their countries. Terms of future trade as well as future collaboration and cultural exchanges, and it will play a role in terms of cultural exchanges as well. Raise the bar for the level of cooperation that exists between China and the nations that make up the United States. The world is now aware, as a result of tangible deeds carried out by China and Cuba, that relations between the two countries are indeed genuine. The relationship that exists between the two countries is currently delivering really positive outcomes. Russia, upon learning of the cooperation between Cuba and China, has publicly commended the two countries for their effort. This comes after Russia learned about the cooperation between Cuba and China. After all, if one were to judge things based on how they are in the world right now, all countries that are hostile to the United States are in a weaker position than they were in the past. It would appear that the states are capable of reaching a consensus with one another. This illustrates, among other things, that the current hegemony maintained by the United States is beginning to disintegrate and lose its grip on the world. Step by step, throughout all of the different countries in the world, the United States of America would never, under any circumstances, agree to permit such a turn of events. The United States is so incensed after learning that China and Cuba are cooperating that they can hardly hold their anger any longer. Cooperating. Now, the question is, what action should be taken by the United States of America? In point of fact, in light of the current circumstances, the United States of America is left with no choice but to anger. Even if the United States of America issued a public statement condemning it, it would not be of any use. The power of China has been a source of concern for many nations, and the United States can only monitor the developments in China's neighbors. The relationship between Cuba and China evolves into one of strategic cooperation. You should realize that China has always supported the idea that collaboration is preferable to confrontation. This is also the direction of development that other countries around the world anticipate for the country. After all, conflict will invariably bring about an infinite amount of harm. Only when countries pool their resources and work together can a situation be created in which both parties benefit. In relation to one another, it's possible that when Cuba and China have jointly replied to the pressure from the United States, Cuba and China would reconsider their stance. States, as well as other countries that are subject to sanctions from the United States, will be more likely to China. Wait! There are some eye-opening video no one tells you about. Just click them